In the last few episodes, we talked about cognitive load theory and the ICAP framework. Those are general learning methods. If you apply them well in middle school or even in college, getting good grades is not very hard. But if all you do is learn classroom knowledge well, you are still only an ordinary talent. If you want to stand out, you have to do things that school does not teach, and things most people cannot do. Today we will talk about how to reach the level of an expert, a top performer, even a star. That means you cannot be satisfied with being just a good product on an industrial education assembly line. You need a separate, customized learning path. And that path is now very clear. Deliberate practice. We have talked about deliberate practice before, but today let's take it one level higher. Over the past 20 years, the theory of deliberate practice has gone through a whole cycle. From being worshipped, to being demystified, and then back to a more rational place. At the center of that debate is one question. How important is talent, really? Ordinary people have always known talent matters. Otherwise, why do some children seem to become experts so effortlessly? But for a long time, scholars tried to downplay talent. They wanted everything to be technical. They wanted to prove that practice mattered far more than talent. Today, we know talent still matters. So what is talent, exactly? Is it some mysterious inner light? The good news is that science now has enough research to propose a more reasonable unified theory. Talent does not have to remain mystical. Talent is also an engineering problem. For a long time, people could not explain why some people become top performers and others do not. Sometimes we said it was diligence. Sometimes we said it was talent. But those are still very broad explanations. On the microscopic level, how do diligence and talent actually work? Every teacher thinks they know how experts are made. But without data, that is only intuition. The fog started to clear in 1993. Psychologist Anders Ericsson at Florida State University studied violinists at the Berlin Academy of Music and found that the most important difference between top performers and ordinary players was total practice time. People realized that skill was not some mysterious force after all. Ericsson then carried out many more studies and found that in music, sports, chess, and medicine, outstanding performance was not a miracle given by genes. It was built through specific kinds of practice. So becoming an expert turned out to be something you could do on purpose. That gave ordinary people huge hope. But Ericsson's work was quickly misunderstood. The most famous distortion came from Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers, where he turned the idea into the 10,000-hour rule. If you practice enough, say for about 10 years, you can become an expert in almost anything. But that is not the heart of Ericsson's theory. The real point is that experience does not automatically accumulate. The original studies only counted practice time because time was easy to measure. The real question is not how long you practice. The real question is what exactly you are practicing. If you train figure skating by endlessly repeating only the easiest jumps, then no matter how hard you work, you are just repeating the same low-level stuff. A real expert spends time on the hardest movements. Think about a taxi driver who has driven for 20 years. That does not necessarily mean they are a better driver than a racing driver who trained intensely for 1 year. Ericsson called this approach deliberate practice. Imagine you are learning piano and practicing a 40-minute piece. If you always play it from beginning to end, then play it again, and again, that is not deliberate practice. Deliberate practice means focusing on your weakest part. Suppose there are 4 measures you always mess up. Then you isolate those 4 measures. Slow them down. Notice the mistakes. Change only one thing at a time. Playing the whole piece over and over gives you familiarity. Working on weak points gives you control. You might say, I already have clear goals. I seek feedback. I practice with full concentration. Isn't that deliberate practice? Not yet. Ericsson would say that is only purposeful practice. It is serious, but it is not enough. True deliberate practice must meet 4 conditions. First, it has to be in a field with an established training system, and you need a professional coach. The coach is not just giving general knowledge. The coach helps you build precise mental representations of what correct actually looks like. That is why learning basketball by watching videos at home is not enough. You need a coach there in person telling you exactly how the movement should be done. Not roughly. Exactly. Second, you need a high-resolution target. Deliberate practice requires you to break a skill into tiny pieces. You are not practicing basketball. You are practicing, the exact footwork at the moment after catching the ball. You are not learning English. You are fixing these 3 sounds that I always mispronounce until I can say them correctly 10 times in a row. You are not practicing the whole song. You are practicing the transition between bars 4 and 8 with the left hand until it stops falling apart. The more specific the target, the easier the error becomes visible. It is not "I want to become stronger." It is, "Today I am only changing this one mistake." Third, you need immediate feedback. Not tomorrow. Not after the class, when someone checks your video and comments later. The mistake has to be corrected right away. If it is not corrected immediately, it gets repeated, then automatized, then it becomes a bad habit. Efficient training cannot afford to let bad habits form. That is why you need a coach watching you closely. Fourth, you have to stay at the edge of your ability, in the so-called learning zone. In the comfort zone, the task is too easy. In the panic zone, it is too hard. Real learning happens in the middle. The place where you are almost able to do it, but not quite. That should remind you of the free energy principle we discussed earlier. You need to feed the nervous system a dose of surprise that it can still absorb. The learning zone sounds simple, but ordinary people rarely have the freedom or resources to stay there for long. The tasks your boss gives you are often things you already know how to do. A lot of life gets wasted on routine. That is why some middle-aged people look at full-time students with envy. We want to learn too. We just do not have your conditions. Deliberate practice is neither a grand narrative nor a vague call to suffer more. You could say, it is an error compression technology. It assumes every skill can be broken down, measured, corrected, and improved. Top performers are not the people who keep repeating slogans like, "Sweat more in peacetime so you bleed less in war." Top performers are the ones who keep refining the next technical action with precision. People who worship suffering are often just repeating themselves. People who keep improving are rebuilding themselves. We still need evidence. Does deliberate practice actually work? For training beginners into experts, the effect is very clear. Ericsson already did a huge amount of work, so let's just look at a recent example. A 2025 randomized clinical trial trained 88 medical students on neurosurgery simulation. The study found that, if AI first identified errors and then human experts gave personalized feedback based on those errors, the training worked much better than relying only on an intelligent tutoring system. It improved immediate performance and also helped skill transfer. Deliberate practice has also been used to train psychotherapists. Trainees review recorded sessions with patients, analyze missed signals frame by frame under supervision, then role-play and correct their responses. A 2025 review found that the deliberate practice group outperformed the control group. Even in university classrooms, deliberate practice can help students develop basic listening skills. Learning how to actually listen to another person. Almost any skill can be deliberately practiced. These studies tell us something important. Experience is not the same as expertise. You can work in a field for 20 years and still not really be good at it. You may just be repeating the same mistake for 20 years. Only deliberate practice turns experience into expertise. But once you become an expert, does deliberate practice still explain everything? What about the jump from expert to top performer, or from top performer to star? Here the story changes. Once you reach the professional level, deliberate practice becomes less and less able to explain the differences between the very best people. A large 2014 study found that, in gaming and chess, deliberate practice explained 28% of performance differences. In music, 21%. In sports, 18%. In education, only 4%. In professional work like programming, less than 1%. A 2016 meta-analysis focused on sports found that deliberate practice explained about 18% of the difference among ordinary athletes, but only 1% among elite athletes. One obvious point is that elite athletes are already using deliberate practice. So of course deliberate practice alone cannot explain the differences between them. But there is a deeper pattern here. Deliberate practice seems to explain more in stable, rule-based, low-uncertainty fields like piano or chess. In complex, uncertain fields like business and creative writing, deliberate practice is only the entry ticket. The real outcome often depends on other things. There has been a lot of debate about this. Ericsson's response was that critics were using the wrong statistical methods, or that some training activities simply did not count as deliberate practice. Critics replied that, if the definition keeps getting narrower, is it still objective? But the real issue may be simpler. Different fields have different levels of noise. If the rules are vague, the variables are many, and feedback is delayed, then you often do not even know what went wrong. In that kind of environment, deliberate practice is less powerful. But that does not mean it is useless. If deliberate practice explains only part of the difference, then what explains the rest? Part of it is luck. But a significant part is talent. Talent definitely matters. You cannot seriously say that a 1.75-meter basketball player and a 2.15-meter basketball player have the same chance of becoming a star. But talent implies inequality, and we do not like inequality. That is why we often avoid talking about talent. 20 years ago, a bestseller called Talent is Overrated argued exactly that, talent is overrated. But talent does exist. And in the deliberate practice framework, it is not magic. It is an engineering configuration. In simple terms, talent means built-in sensitivity and plasticity. First, talent means your sensors are better. You have higher resolution for information. Some people in music are unusually sensitive to pitch, rhythm, and harmony. Some people in sports are unusually sensitive to timing, spacing, and body balance. In cognitive work, some people are unusually sensitive to patterns, structure, and anomalies. A lot of this has a genetic component. Second, talent means your neural network updates faster. That depends partly on working memory capacity. If a coach says, "You played that passage wrong," one person feels only hurt. Another person can instantly replay it in the mind, locate the error, break it apart, and rebuild it. That is not just emotional toughness. That is hardware. Why can some people tolerate deliberate practice while others cannot? Interest is also a kind of talent. For some people, a practice sequence feels more rewarding. Their reward function is more sensitive. They do not experience it as boring. They experience it as addictive. Another form of talent is the ability to choose a good environment. When you have even a small advantage, do you want to magnify it? Do you actively search for better teachers, better resources, better peers, and higher quality practice? How ambitious are you? That too has a genetic component. Talent also comes in two forms: general talent and specific talent. Some people are just naturally good at everything. Others are highly sensitive in one particular domain. So talent is really the set of parameters that makes you better at noticing mistakes, correcting mistakes, enjoying feedback, and placing yourself in the right environment. Everyone starts with a different inner kernel. That is a fact we have to accept. But deliberate practice is where we can act. Talent and deliberate practice are not opposites. They multiply each other. Deliberate practice determines whether you are updating and compounding. Talent determines what rate each update compounds at. That is why two people can do the same amount of deliberate practice and end up in very different places. One becomes a true star. The other becomes only an ordinary expert. From expert to star, the method changes again. Experts can do things correctly. Stars can do things beautifully. And they can do them in a way that is distinctive. If you want identity and style, you need your own style. The score is fixed, but how you play it is up to you. Style is the stable choice you make once the hard constraints are already satisfied. But style is not pure talent either. It also needs deliberate practice. A choice without control is a mistake. A choice with control is style. When you can perform correctly, and then intentionally shape the timing, tone, phrasing, or emphasis so that people immediately recognize it as yours, that is style. Style is not the enemy of correctness. Style is the leftover freedom after correctness is secured. Only through repeated deliberate practice can you slowly develop that unique self. Talent determines what you are most sensitive to. Deliberate practice determines whether that sensitivity can become stable control. Style is the identifiable bias you leave behind once you have that control. A top performer does not say, "I was born different." A top performer says, "I practiced the right thing until it became stable enough to let my personality show." Not quite. A 2025 review found something surprising. Among children, who looked like prodigies in their youth, and the people who later became world-class experts, almost 90% were not the same people. Many children who achieved early success through deliberate practice did not become stars later. And many true masters were not especially visible when they were young. People with strong general talent can perform well in almost any field. But if they lock into a path too early, they often only find a local optimum. That is the scientific version of the old saying. A child can be brilliant early, but that does not guarantee later greatness. Truly great performers often try many fields when they are young. They do not specialize too early. That lets them discover which field really fits them, and also gives them cross-domain experience for later development. So for someone with ambition, the path looks something like this. First, explore broadly and find out what suits you. Second, once you choose a track, grow through talent times deliberate practice. Third, after reaching a high level, explore again to see how to build a personal style on top of correctness. Fourth, keep practicing until that style becomes stable. Fifth, at that point, you are already highly distinctive. If you want to go further, environment and luck start to matter a lot. And sixth, do not forget to explore again after some time. In the end, without talent, deliberate practice can still take you to a good place. But without practice, talent is just an option. I hope these episodes have made one thing clear. Learning is an engineering process. Some people say learning is about suffering. Some say it is about motivation. Some say it is just a personality trait. Most of that is emotional storytelling. Real experts do not rely on mysticism. They simply keep exploring, while constantly improving the next mistake. That's it for today's content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.